Denzel Washington sat beneath the marble arches of the Supreme Court hearing room, a place built to echo power. His suit was plain. His posture said he wasn't here for the cameras. His folder sat unopened on the polished table, one hand resting lightly on top of it, as if he already knew it held more truth than any speech he could give. Across from him, Chief Justice John Roberts leaned forward in his leather chair, pen tapping against a stack of notes that looked far thicker than they needed to be. Roberts' half-smile was polite, professional, but everyone watching could feel what was underneath. A chess player staring down a man he thought couldn't see the board. Roberts said, "Mr. Washington, you've been invited to give your views on these new national security measures. Before we begin, I must say, it is unusual for this court to hear extended commentary from someone with no legal credentials." Denzel didn't flinch. Denzel said, "Sometimes the law forgets the people it's meant to protect. I'm just here to remind you." A few clerks glanced up from their notepads. The rustle of reporters scribbling notes went dead quiet for one heartbeat. Roberts smiled a fraction wider, the pen tapping once on the bench. Roberts said, "And what do you believe you can add to a constitutional debate that decades of precedent haven't settled?" Denzel said, "Perspective." Roberts laughed softly, just enough to draw a few low chuckles from the rows behind him. The kind of laugh that reminded everyone who was in the chair with the gavel. Roberts said, "Perspective is fine for an actor, Mr. Washington. But the Constitution does not bend for speeches. It is governed by precedent, statute, and the plain text, not feelings." Denzel leaned forward, hands still calm. Denzel said, "And yet somehow you found room in that text for Dred Scott." The room held its breath. A cough somewhere in the back. The marble seemed to swallow the echo. Robert's pen stopped tapping. He forced the smile back onto his face. Roberts said, "A shameful ruling. Long overturned. Are you suggesting this court is in danger of repeating such an error?" Denzel's stare never broke. Denzel said, "I'm saying any court that forgets its failures is doomed to repeat them." Another hush, heavier than the one before. One aide scribbled faster, head down, as if the ink might keep up with the tension. Roberts cleared his throat. He spread his notes like a fan, each page a shield. Roberts said, "You are not a lawyer, Mr. Washington. I doubt you've read even half the briefs filed in this matter. So before you imply any negligence by this bench, tell me, do you actually understand the difference between a constitutional right and a statutory privilege?" Denzel said nothing for a beat. He let the question sit there, fat and smug. Then he said, "Better than some who hide behind the difference." A low ripple, the smallest gasp from a clerk who quickly ducked her head. Roberts leaned back, pen now still. His grin flickered, the chessboard not quite as neat as he'd hoped. Roberts said, "Careful. This is not a stage for grandstanding." Denzel's voice was calm as stone. Denzel said, "No. This is the place where grandstanding does the most damage when no one stands up to it." Robert's eyes darted to his stack again. He flipped a page, voice tight now. Roberts said, "You once said the law should serve the people first. Yet you support limits on security measures designed to protect those very people. How do you reconcile that contradiction?" Denzel said, "By remembering the law serves people, not power. When you forget that, you stop being judges and start being guards at the wrong door." A hush. Another. Each silence a rope tightening around the old, polished wood of that bench. Roberts shifted slightly, the smile gone for the first time. He tried to pivot. Roberts said, "You claim to care for the people. But do you even know what protections this court has built since Dred Scott, Korematsu? Do you know the precedents that define when rights can be balanced with security?" Denzel's fingers brushed his folder, still unopened. He said, "I do. And I know the parts you don't teach." Roberts froze for half a heartbeat, the kind of flinch no pen could hide. A few in the gallery leaned forward, trying to see what was in that folder. Denzel didn't move, didn't rush. He let the question hang like a blade waiting for the right moment to drop. Roberts shifted in his seat, his eyes darting down to the folder under Denzel's fingertips like it might bite him. He forced his voice back to that smooth, polite courtroom register, but it cracked at the edges. Roberts said, "Mr. Washington, you say you know what the law forgets. Then enlighten us. What wisdom does an actor bring that the Supreme Court has somehow missed?" Denzel tapped the folder once, slow and deliberate. But he didn't open it. "Not yet," Denzel said. "The same wisdom that got buried when men in these chairs decided they were too smart to listen to people who paid the price for their mistakes." A hush spread from the press benches to the marble pillars. One of Roberts' clerks scribbled furiously, but everyone else just watched the Chief Justice's eyes narrow. Roberts said, "You like to bring up Dred Scott. You enjoy painting this bench with old sins. But we learn, Mr. Washington. We evolve." Denzel didn't flinch. Denzel said, "Then prove it." Roberts bristled, the pen now still, his fingers locked around it like a lifeline. He leaned forward, trying to pull the room back onto his side. Roberts said, "We have spent decades defining strict scrutiny, rational basis, balancing state interests with individual liberties. You claim to understand the spirit behind those words. Fine. Name a single ruling since Dred Scott that proves this bench cannot be trusted." Denzel's gaze dropped for the first time to that folder. His thumb brushed the corner, the sound of paper sliding in the quiet room. Denzel said, "I'll give you more than a ruling. I'll give you a man who saw the truth in your words, and the lie underneath." Roberts squinted, the grin gone, his voice stiff. Roberts said, "What are you talking about?" Denzel didn't open the folder yet. He just let the name hover in the air. Denzel said, "Frederick Douglass." A low murmur rolled across the gallery like wind through dry leaves. Even the stenographer's fingers paused for a second before catching up. Roberts said, "A powerful orator, but hardly relevant to modern constitutional law." Denzel leaned in, his voice quiet, but heavy enough to flatten every other sound in the room. Denzel said, "Relevant enough when he said your Constitution could be a glorious liberty document, if interpreted in the spirit of justice." Roberts opened his mouth, but nothing came out for a moment. He fumbled for a page in his binder, a quote he hadn't prepared for. Denzel kept going, calm, cutting through every flicker of doubt on Roberts' face. Denzel said, "You cite precedent like a fortress, but your fortress leaks when you forget who built it. Douglas wrote letters after Dred Scott, words that got buried in the archives because they made men like you uncomfortable." Roberts' pen tapped again, faster this time. He tried to regain control. Roberts said, "If you're implying this court ignores original intent." Denzel's eyes flashed, just once, like steel catching light. Denzel said, "I'm saying original intent without original truth is a lie. And I've got the truth right here." He tapped the folder again, but didn't lift it. The whole chamber leaned forward. No coughs, no rustle, just the soft hum of a dozen phones recording what they knew was about to hit every feed by midnight. Roberts shifted back, crossing his arms, the move of a man who realizes he's about to see something he can't unsee. Denzel said, "You wanted to test my brilliance? Let's see if you can handle the evidence." The hush was thick enough to choke on. A young law student near the back mouthed, "What letter?" to her neighbor, but no one answered. Because the only answer was sitting in Denzel's hands, and the next page he'd read would show who really didn't know their own law. The silence stretched so tight that the room seemed to shrink around the single folder under Denzel's hand. John Roberts' eyes flicked from the paper to Denzel's face, as if he could find a trap there, but there was nothing except that steady, unblinking stare. Denzel opened the folder slowly, the edges of a thin, yellowed copy visible beneath the crisp, white briefing paper. He slid it forward on the table with the same calm he'd carried since the moment he sat down. Denzel said, "This is a letter Frederick Douglass wrote in 1857, just weeks after the Dred Scott decision. It's been kept in a private collection for decades. Robert's throat bobbed once. He tried to lean back like it didn't matter, but his fingers twitched against his binder. Roberts said, "And you expect us to believe an actor stumbled on a piece of legal history no scholar has produced?" Denzel's smile was thin, not arrogant, just true. Denzel said, "I didn't stumble on it. I looked for it. Because you only find what you're willing to see." He turned the letter so the table could read the lines. "Old ink, plain but burning." Denzel said. Douglas wrote, "Men may quote your Constitution, but unless they read it in the light of justice, they will use it to bind the hands of the weak and protect the power of the strong." A single gasp slipped from the gallery. A reporter near the front mouthed the words as she typed. Roberts tried to steady his voice, but it cracked around the edges. Roberts said, "This is rhetoric, not law." Denzel tapped the page once, his finger gentle as if the words could bruise. Denzel said, "It's both. This is what original intent means. Not just your precious clauses, but the spirit men like Douglas warned you about." Robert's jaw clenched. He shuffled his papers, but no one cared what was on them anymore. Denzel's voice dropped to that quiet weight that needed no gavel. Denzel said, "You stand here pretending you've outgrown Dred Scott, but you keep forgetting it's not the text that failed. It's the men who twisted it to fit their power." Roberts looked down at his notes, small, the grin gone for good. Denzel said, "Your legal brilliance isn't in your degrees. It's in whether you have the courage to see when the words don't match the truth." The hush thickened until even the stenographer hesitated at the keys. One clerk swallowed hard, eyes wide as she traced the lines of the old letter. Roberts tried one last line, voice low, cornered. Roberts said, "Mr. Washington, are you finished lecturing this bench?" Denzel's hands closed the folder slowly. He didn't stand. He didn't need to. Denzel said, "I'm not a lawyer, Chief Justice. I'm a citizen, and this court works for me." The room cracked open with whispers that rose and fell like a wave. Reporters had their headline. The senators would have their spin. But the truth had already settled into every camera lens in that marble hall. Denzel sat back, folding his hands again. Calm, the letter now tucked back into the folder like a torch left behind for anyone who cared enough to read it. And across the table, Chief Justice John Roberts discovered what he'd underestimated all along. This is the USA Liberty. Subscribe if you know the law is only as strong as the people who hold it accountable. Subscribe if you believe the Constitution is a promise, not a loophole. Subscribe because they will forget, and we will remind them. Stay awake. Stay ready.